3, 2, 1. Panel, ladies and gentlemen, China is not a perfect actor, but we believe they have done something correct in order to have such a strong presence, influence, and dominance in contract development manufacturing organizations or CDMOs, just like Wuxi Aptech and the other ones supported by the Chinese government or ones that are paid for and bolstered by the Chinese economy. This has largely democratized access and proliferation to medicine and has positively impacted the following. A, the research and development in the academe or in the business world that tries to seek new and better medical innovations. B, pushing the frontier of innovation wherein we always constantly figure out how can we do things in the cheapest way possible to be able to serve a variety of markets. And C, and most importantly, where can we be able to save the most amount of lives in the world, especially coming off an inflationary and post-COVID world with new normal, when we're opening up to these particular vulnerabilities. We think that it's precisely because of what the previous speaker stated that these countries in status quo are not able to produce medicine. Not because China crowds them out, but because they just don't have the technology, the expertise, the capacity to produce, and the intellectual property to be able to do it. That is to say, creating medicine is very expensive, and absent Chinese CMDO involvement, they would not have the knowledge, the manpower, and the equipment to be able to produce. It's precisely because they're able to do things like develop and manufacture drugs and even outsource complex production in your own country if you're from like a developing world who the previous speaker characterizes to have limited capacity, that these CMDOs are actually able to do it. We need to understand how this global hub really works. They're really key in terms of pharmaceutical supply chain, things like drug development, clinical trials, large-scale manufacturing, and we really have to understand the reason in terms of why the US is involved. The US currently is like going very protectionist with Trump season 2, and that in and of itself is a principled concession that something China's doing is hurting their veins, and this is in spirit of US protectionism because they want to protect their own domestic industry. But just as the previous speaker stated in their speech, not all countries are like the EU or are like the US. That is to say, sure, the US can take it, but other countries who are not as capable, not as rich, need these Chinese contract manufacturers to be able to produce medicine. Because absent that, sure, they'd have to do it amongst themselves, but the counterfactual and comparative is that without partnering with China to help them in their supply chain, they might have to spend even more money, take even more time to be able to do the same amount of things to be able to spread to the world in terms of being able to send out medicine. What is my extension? Responses will be integrated. My case is very simple. I am going to talk to you about why the creation of supply lines to fill in missing components in the value chain of many different countries are actually good, and that can best happen through Chinese CMDOs instead of having to do things like build a factory from scratch, research centers from scratch, and even have to like buy it from someone else. It's better to be able to still produce it and be able to partner with China to help in that particular production. This looks like vertical or horizontal integration within your own supply chain to be able to do things like create the particular medicine. Meaning we understand in status quo that these other countries in the world have limited capacity, as the previous speaker mentioned. That's why instead of having to produce everything yourself, a part of that process to make medicine or distribute medicine can actually be done by those Chinese toll manufacturers and other smaller businesses that are able to take off that load. What that does, and the comparative is that without these Chinese CDMOs, you do not have economies of scale to be able to compete. That is why large countries like the US and parts of Europe do feel threatened to an extent. Therefore, they can do this protectionism. But in terms of majority of countries, this being the foreign market phrase and the motion, have largely been able to be affected. That's exactly why other countries, bigger ones at that, are put on the defense, because it's a concession that China is doing something well, and absent that, they're going to particularly be able to take over. But before I proceed, any POIs for closing? 3, 2, 1.
Right.
Go for it.
So does OO compromise on the misuse of data and the possible selling of data, given the fact that China is so notoriously well known for it?
Like, bro, either way, China does those things when you like log in on your smartphone or use Facebook. China's not perfect. We're not here to take on the burden that we're defending all the bad shit China does. We're saying that given that this is so important to China, this creates an incentive structure for them to do it fairly. Because if they sell your data, or they cheat you, or they produce bad amounts of medicine, then you won't want to partner with them again. So the fact that it's so crucial, similar to what we see with Chinese e-vehicles with the rise of BYD and NIO, you actually have a check and balance and incentive structure for them to do things fairly. Side government does not understand the reality of how things work, and it's precisely because of that lacking that it creates an opportunity for businesses, whether you are big or whether you are small, to be able to have a chance at producing your own medicine, and that leads to ultimately more generic forms of medicine becoming more accessible and actually cheaper when you're able to lower down the cost of production and as a consequence offer it at a relatively more affordable price. Absent partnering with China, we posit that a lot of these medicines would not have existed, or at the best case of their side, become really more expensive, which we think is harmful for the foreign market and the very people we're trying to save, to give good quality medicine to help save their lives and uplift them from situations we are very proud to oppose.